Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. Sakura waltzed back in a whirlwind of apologies and crocodile tears. Haruto, ever the fool, lapped it up. Meanwhile, I was handed divorce papers, a severance package for my heart. 3 years of my life reduced to a legal document and a hefty payout. I signed, the pen trembling in my hand, my vision blurring with unshed tears. Little did they know I carried his child, his heir, and I wasn't about to hand him over on a silver platter. Shota, my supposed savior, my husband's nemesis, became my unlikely ally. 4 years later, the wedding bells chimed. Haruto watched, his face a mask of regret as his son, a mini-me with Shota's mischievous grin, called another man dad. The irony was sweet, a delicious revenge served cold. 3 years of culinary masterpieces left untouched, of meticulously searched acupuncture points met with a sigh of unwavering support. Met with, well, nothing. Absolutely, positively bone-chillingly nothing. I swear I could have knitted him a sweater out of unicorn hair. And he'd probably just grunt and ask if it came in black. Remember those wedding magazines I used to devour? Happily ever after, they proclaimed, the joy of shared mornings, they gushed. Yeah, well, my happily ever after involved me silently eating breakfast alone while Haruto scanned the business section. His face a mask of impenetrable indifference. Joy of shared mornings? More like the agony of shared silence. It wasn't always like this, of course. There was a time, a naive, idiotic time, when I actually believed that if I just loved him enough, cared for him enough, he'd what? Spontaneously combust with affection? Grow a heart 3 sizes too big, Grinch style? I chuckle, a dry, humorless sound. Clearly, my understanding of human anatomy needs a serious overhaul. It all started with Sakura, my darling sister. She was supposed to marry Haruto. The engagement photos were gorgeous. Sakura radiant, Haruto stoic. Predictable, really. Then bam. True love called. Apparently in the form of a backpacking musician with questionable hygiene. Sakura, bless her impulsive soul, was gone, and I, ever the dutiful little sister, stepped in. A replacement bride. A business transaction masked as holy matrimony. 7 years. 7 years I harbored a secret, idiotic crush on Haruto. 7 years of pining, dreaming, and imagining a life that would never be. And then Sakura's dramatic exit thrust me into the spotlight. Or more accurately, into the shadows. Haruto didn't love me then, and he certainly doesn't love me now. 3 years, that was the deal. 3 years of pretending, of playing house, of desperately trying to ignite a spark in a man made of ice. And now, well, now the 3 years are almost up. Almost. I should have seen it coming, the clipped tone at breakfast, the way he avoided my gaze, the everything. Still, a girl can hope, right? Apparently not this girl. The doorbell rang, jolting me from my reverie. Haruto walked in, briefcase in hand, his expression as neutral as Switzerland. No hi. No, how was your day? Just business, Mio, he said, his voice flat. He held out a slim folder, divorce papers. My stomach lurched. I knew it was coming, but seeing the actual document, the cold legal reality of it all still stung. 20 million, he added, as if that would somehow soften the blow. 20 million to erase 3 years of my life. 20 million to compensate for the emotional wasteland he turned my heart into. I stared at the papers, at the stark black and white print that spelled out the end of my pathetic charade. A flicker of that old idiotic hope ignited within me. Haruto, I began, my voice trembling slightly. What if I told you I was pregnant? His response was immediate, brutal. Impossible. I had a vasectomy. And just like that, the flicker died, extinguished. My world tilted on its axis, the carefully constructed facade of my life crumbling around me. A vasectomy? If he'd had a vasectomy, then how? A cold dread crept into my heart, a chilling premonition of betrayal. Before I could even process the thought, the phone rang. My mother. Mio. Sakura is back. We're having a family dinner tonight. Bring Haruto. Sakura was back, of course she was, and suddenly everything made a terrible, awful sense. Pregnant. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken implications. It was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to claw back some semblance of something. Love, respect, I don't even know anymore. Maybe just a shred of human decency. Haruto's reaction was swift, clinical. Impossible. he stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. I had a vasectomy. The word echoed in my mind, a death knell to any lingering hope. It wasn't just a rejection of me, it was a rejection of everything. Our supposed future, our supposed life together, even the tiny impossible miracle growing inside me. My carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of sand and wishful thinking, crumbled. 3 years. 3 years of pretending, of sacrificing, of loving a man who was incapable of loving me back. And now I was faced with the stark, brutal truth. I was nothing more than a placeholder, a stand-in for the woman he truly desired. My internal monologue took a decidedly darker turn. Bitterness, sharp and corrosive, began to eat away at the remnants of my naive optimism. A vasectomy? Why? When had he planned this all along? Had he known, even as he was reciting those hollow vows, that our marriage was a sham? The question swirled in my mind, each one a barb tearing at the already fragile fabric of my self-worth. How could I have been so blind, so stupid, so utterly pathetically in love with a man who treated me like a spare tire? The phone rang, interrupting my descent into self-pity. My mother's voice, bright and cheerful, grated on my nerves. You darling, guess who's back? I already knew. I felt it in my bones the same way you feel a storm brewing on the horizon. Sakura? I asked, my voice flat. Yes, she's back, and well, things didn't quite work out with. My mother's voice trailed off, a hint of awkwardness creeping in. We're having a family dinner tonight. You and Haruto will be the... Of course. Because what's a little betrayal between family? What's a little emotional devastation compared to maintaining appearances? My mother's words were the final nail in the coffin of my illusions. Sakura was back, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The vasectomy, the divorce papers, the coldness, the indifference. It all made a terrible, sickening sense. Haruto wasn't just divorcing me. He was making room for Sakura, my sister, the woman he'd always wanted, the woman he'd chosen over me not once but twice. A wave of nausea washed over me. It wasn't just morning sickness. It was the realization that I had been living a lie, that my entire life, my entire identity, had been built on a foundation of someone else's desires. I wasn't the heroine of my own life. I was a supporting character in Sakura's perfect love story, the understudy who never got to take center stage. But this time, things were going to be different. This time, before I signed those damn divorce papers, I was going to make them both suffer. The drive to my parents' house was a blur. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, a strange sense of liberation. It was as if a switch had flipped inside me. The naive love for Haruto was gone, replaced by someone else. Someone sharper, colder, more calculating. I was done being the doormat, the convenient replacement. I was going to rewrite this narrative, even if it meant becoming the villain in their perfect little play. As I walked through the door, the familiar scent of my mother's cooking hit me. It used to be a comforting smell, but tonight it just felt cloying. Sakura was already there, radiant as ever, chatting animatedly with my parents. Haruto stood beside her, a statue of stoicism. They looked like the picture-perfect couple, the actual picture-perfect couple. And I? Well, I was the unwanted guest at their little party. May you, darling, you're here. My mother rushed over, her smile a tad too bright. Sakura was just telling us about her travels. Oh really? I said, my voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. How fascinating. Do tell me all about it. Sakura's smile faltered slightly. Well, it's a long story. Oh, I have plenty of time, I chirped, sliding my arm through hers. She stiffened at my touch, but I held on tight, plastering a smile on my face. Don't we, darling? Haruto grunted in response, his eyes darting nervously towards Sakura. I could practically taste their discomfort. It was delicious. The dinner was a masterclass in awkwardness. I played the doting wife to the hilt, heaping food onto Haruto's plate, whispering affectionate nothings in his ear, all while keeping my eyes fixed on Sakura. She squirmed in her seat, her forced smile growing increasingly strained. My mother, bless her oblivious heart, beamed at us, completely missing the undercurrent of tension. Or perhaps she wasn't missing it at all. Perhaps she simply didn't care. Haruto, darling, you simply must try the fish, I said, placing a large flaky piece on his plate. It's your favorite. Haruto mumbled a thank you, his gaze fixed on his plate. He barely touched the fish. I knew he hated fish, but Sakura loved it. Small details, they mattered. "Mio, you've changed," Haruto said later, his voice low as we were leaving. We had excused ourselves from the table after Sakura had excused herself upstairs with a headache, and our mother had gone to the kitchen to prepare dessert. "Have I?" I replied, my smile cool. "I'm simply a devoted wife, darling. Isn't that what you always wanted?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I knew exactly what he wanted, and it wasn't me. As we drove home in strained silence, I replayed the evening in my mind. The way Sakura's smile had faltered, the way Haruto had squirmed, the way my mother had been my mother. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. It wasn't love. It certainly wasn't happiness. It was something darker, something sharper. It was the beginning of my transformation. I was no longer the naive, heartbroken girl. I was something else entirely. I was the villainess, and I was just getting started. The silence in the car was deafening. Haruto gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched. I, on the other hand, was perfectly content to stare out the window, humming a cheerful tune. Let him stew. Let him wonder. Let him realize slowly and painfully that the game had changed. The moment we stepped into the house, the dam broke. What was that? Haruto grabbed my arm, his voice low and dangerous. What was what, darling? I replied innocently, slipping off my shoes. That charade back there, the clinging, the whispering. He sputtered, unable to find the words. "Oh, that?" I said, my voice light. "I was just being a good wife. Isn't that what you wanted?" "Don't play coy with me, Mio," he snarled. "You've changed. You're different." Different. I laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Yes, I suppose I am. 3 years of being ignored tends to have that effect on a person. He opened his mouth to retort, then closed it again, his face a mask of frustration. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, trying to make sense of my sudden transformation. Good. Let him struggle. Let him realize that he no longer had the upper hand. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. No more catering to his every whim. No more tiptoeing around his moods. No more trying to win his affection. I was done. This was my life now, and I was going to live it on my own terms. I skipped the elaborate breakfast I usually prepared for him, opting for a simple bowl of cereal instead. He walked into the kitchen, his face etched with surprise. "Where's breakfast?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. "In the cupboard," I replied, not bothering to look up from my book. "You didn't make anything?" "I'm pregnant, Har," I said, my voice flat. "Not your personal chef." He stared at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. I met his gaze unflinching. This was the new Mio, the Mio who wouldn't back down, who wouldn't be silenced, who wouldn't be ignored. The days that followed were a strange mix of tension and liberation. I ignored his phone calls, slept in late, and spent my days reading, shopping, and indulging in all the things I had denied myself for the past 3 years. I was reclaiming my life piece by piece. My internal monologue was a constant stream of strategic planning. I was no longer driven by love but by a cold, hard desire for revenge. I wanted them to hurt. I wanted them to see what they had thrown away. I wanted them to regret the day they ever met Mio, the replacement bride. One evening, as I was scrolling through my phone, a message popped up. It was from Sakura. A picture of her and Haruto enjoying a spicy hot pot dinner. The caption read, "Oops, sent to the wrong person." I stared at the picture, a slow smile spreading across my face. Spicy hot pot? Haruto hated spicy food, but Sakura loved it. Suddenly, I knew exactly what I had to do. Sakura's little oops moment? Yeah, right. As if I'd believe that was an accident. My dear sister has always been a master manipulator, even back in our pigtail days. This was just another performance in her ongoing drama. A carefully staged scene designed to elicit a reaction. And oh, did it get a reaction? Spicy hot pot. The irony wasn't lost on me. Haruto, with his delicate palate and aversion to anything remotely spicy, sweating over a bubbling cauldron of chili peppers. It was a testament to his desperation, his eagerness to please the woman he truly desired. He was bending over backwards, literally and figuratively, to fit into Sakura's world, while I, the woman who had spent 3 years trying to cater to his every whim, was left with nothing but a bland, empty plate. The news of his hospitalization came as no surprise. Stomach ulcer? Serves him right, I thought, a flicker of dark satisfaction dancing in my heart. I pictured him writhing in pain, his carefully constructed composure crumbling under the assault of chili peppers. It was a fitting punishment for his hypocrisy, his blatant disregard for my feelings. But of course, I couldn't let this opportunity pass without a little visit. Not out of concern, mind you. No, this was purely for my own amusement. I arrived at the hospital, a container of leftover porridge in hand. The irony was delicious. "Haruto, darling," I chirped, entering his room with a bright smile. "I brought you something to eat. Wouldn't want it to go to waste." He glared at me, his face pale and drawn. "What is that?" "Porridge," I replied, popping open the container. "It's good for your stomach. Bland but effective." "Get out," he growled, his voice weak but filled with venom. "Oh, come now, Haruto," I said, taking a seat beside his bed. "Don't be like that. I went to all the trouble of." "Get out," he roared, his voice cracking with frustration. I shrugged, unfazed by his outburst. "Suit yourself," I said, getting up. "I'll just leave this here in case you change your mind." I placed the porridge on his bedside table, a silent reminder of his folly. As I walked out of the room, I couldn't help but smile. He was suffering and I was detached, indifferent. It was a strange, liberating feeling. I was no longer the heartbroken wife clinging to the remnants of a shattered dream. I was an observer, watching the drama unfold from a safe distance. And it was surprisingly entertaining. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled my nostrils as I sat in the clinic's waiting room. Abortion. It was a harsh word, a harsh reality, but what choice did I have? A baby with Haruto, with the man who was already planning his future with my sister. The irony was almost unbearable. "Myo," the nurse called, her voice crisp and efficient. I followed her into a small, brightly lit room. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, greeted me with a warm smile. We discussed the procedure, the risks, the recovery. It all felt strangely detached, like I was watching a scene from a movie. "There is one thing you should know," the doctor said, her voice turning serious. "Your medical history indicates." She paused, consulting my file. "A previous surgery that may have compromised your ability to conceive again. An abortion at this stage could further complicate matters. In simpler terms, Myo, there's a chance you might not be able to have children after this." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Infertile me, the woman who had always dreamed of a big family. A house filled with laughter and sticky fingerprints. It was a cruel twist of fate, a final blow in a long line of betrayals. That night I dreamt. It wasn't the usual jumbled mess of subconscious thoughts. It was a story, a book unfolding before my eyes. I saw Haruto, the male lead, handsome and successful. I saw Sakura, the female lead, beautiful and tragic. And then I saw myself, the disposable side character, the obstacle to be overcome, the pawn in their grand love story. The dream shifted and I saw another character, Shota, the villain, the one who would eventually be defeated, discarded, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. I woke up with a gasp, my heart pounding. The dream felt real, too real. It was a warning, a glimpse into a future I refused to accept. No, I wouldn't be the disposable character. I wouldn't let them win. I would keep this baby, not for Haruto, not for Sakura, but for myself. It was my body, my choice, my life, and I would damn well live it on my own terms. As I left the clinic, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Shota. His grin was wide, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Myo," he said, his voice a low purr. "Fancy meeting you here. Don't tell me you're." He trailed off, his eyebrows raised suggestively. "Don't be ridiculous," I snapped, my cheeks flushing. "It's none of your business." "Oh, but it is," he countered, stepping closer. "Everything about you is my business, Myo. Always has been." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I stared at him, my heart pounding. There was something about Shota, something dangerous and alluring. He was everything Haruto wasn't. Playful, unpredictable, and undeniably interested in me. "Impossible," I muttered, turning to leave. "And you're irresistible," he shot back, his grin widening. Just admit it, Mio, you're starting to like me. I didn't answer, I couldn't. But as I walked away, I felt his gaze burning into my back, a promise of complications to come. Talk about a cliché. One minute I'm striding down the street, fuming about Shah's audacity. The next, I'm tumbling down a flight of stairs, my ankle twisting beneath me. It was like something out of a bad rom-com, except instead of landing in the arms of my charming prince, I ended up sprawled on the pavement, my dignity in tatters. Meow! Shah materialized beside me, his face etched with concern. Are you all right? Just peachy, I muttered, trying to ignore the throbbing pain in my ankle. Aside from the fact that I think I just broke my leg. He scooped me up into his arms, ignoring my protests. Don't be ridiculous, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. It's just a sprain, but we should get it checked out just in case. And that's how I ended up in the hospital again. This time, however, the sterile environment felt less oppressive, the antiseptic smell less suffocating. Perhaps it was Shah's presence, his playful banter and genuine concern, that softened the edges of the clinical setting. Or maybe it was the painkillers. I woke up to the sound of raised voices. Haruto and Shota were locked in a heated argument. What the hell do you think you're doing here? Haruto snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. Taking care of Mio, Shota replied calmly, his gaze fixed on me. Something you clearly failed to do. She's my wife. Not for much longer, Shota countered, his smile widening. And besides, she seems to prefer my company. Haruto turned to me, his voice softening. Are you all right? Does your ankle hurt? I blinked, momentarily stunned by the sudden shift in his demeanor. Concern from Haruto? It was almost unsettling. I'm fine, I mumbled, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach at Shah's possessive gaze. You shouldn't be with him, Mio, Haruto pleaded. He's not good for you. And you are, I retorted, my voice laced with sarcasm. The man who's divorcing me to be with my sister? The man who couldn't even be bothered to tell me he had a vasectomy. Haruto flinched, his face paling. That's not how it is. Oh really? I scoffed. Then enlighten me, Haruto. What exactly is it? He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, defeated. Shota chuckled, his eyes gleaming with amusement. Don't bother, Haruto, he said, his voice smooth as silk. She's made up her mind, haven't you, Mio? I hesitated, my gaze flitting between the two men. Haruto, the man I had loved for 7 years, now looked like a stranger, his face etched with regret and desperation. And Shah, the man I had once dismissed as a nuisance, now held my gaze with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I began, my voice barely above a whisper. I think I've fallen for Shota. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Haruto's face crumpled, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The other hand beamed, his grin widening into a triumphant smile as I lay there, caught between the two men who desired me. I couldn't help but feel a sense of power. For the first time in my life, I was in control. I was no longer the pawn, the replacement, the disposable character. I was the protagonist of my own story, and I was finally ready to write my own happy ending. The air crackled with tension. Haruto stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Shota, ever the opportunist, leaned against the wall, a smug grin plastered across his face. I, the architect of this chaos, reveled in the delicious awkwardness of the moment. I think I've fallen for Shota, I repeated, savoring the words. It wasn't entirely a lie. There was something about Shota, his audacity, his unwavering pursuit, that had chipped away at my defenses. And let's be honest, a little rebound fling with the villain of the story was the perfect way to stick it to Haruto and Sakura. Mio, you can't be serious, Haruto sputtered, his voice laced with desperation. He's not right for you. Oh, and you are? I retorted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. The man who's been sleeping with my sister behind my back? The color drained from his face. That was before. Before what, Haruto? I cut him off, my patience wearing thin. Before you realized you were losing me? Before you saw me with another man? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I turned to Shota, who was watching the exchange with undisguised amusement. Shota, I said, my voice firm. Do you have those divorce papers? He reached into his jacket, and pulled out a familiar-looking folder. "Always prepared, darling," he said, handing it to me. I flipped it open, scanned the document, and signed my name with a flourish. "There," I said, handing it back to Shota. "It's done." Haruto lunged forward, his hand outstretched. "Mio, wait." "Goodbye, Haruto," I said, my voice cold and final. "I hope you and Sakura will be very happy together." I turned and walked out of the hospital room, Shota trailing behind me. As I stepped out into the sunshine, I felt a wave of liberation wash over me. It was over, the charade, the heartbreak, the years of wasted love. I was free. Later that day, Sakura arrived at my apartment, a check clutched in her manicured hand. "5 million, she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, Mio, just leave. Disappear. Let us be happy." I took the check, a wry smile playing on my lips. "As you wish, dear sister," I said, my voice laced with mock sweetness. "Enjoy your ill-gotten gains." I packed my bags, leaving behind the remnants of my old life. As I closed the door to my apartment, I felt a pang of sadness, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of anticipation. A new chapter was beginning, a chapter filled with possibilities. I was no longer the naive girl who had walked into that apartment 3 years ago. I was stronger, wiser, and infinitely more cynical. And I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. Life, it seems, has a twisted sense of humor. Just when I'd started to embrace the tranquility of my new existence, throws a curveball in the form of a speeding car careening towards me as I crossed the street. 1 minute I'm admiring the quaint storefronts, the next I'm staring death in the face. Talk about a buzzkill. But then a blur of motion. Shah shoved me out of the way, a split-second decision that sent him flying instead. The screech of tires, the sickening thud of impact, the horrified gasps of onlookers. It all happened in a flash, and then silence. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. "Shah!" I screamed, rushing towards his crumpled form. He lay on the asphalt, his eyes closed, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Panic surged through me, a tidal wave of fear and regret. "Shah, wake up!" I cried, my voice cracking. "Please, Shah, don't leave me." He groaned, his eyelids fluttering open. "Mew," he whispered, his voice weak. "Don't cry. Don't you dare tell me not to cry." I sobbed, tears streaming down my face. "You idiot, why did you do that?" He reached out his hand, trembling, as he cupped my cheek. "Couldn't let anything happen to you," he murmured, his eyes filled with a tenderness that melted my heart. "Not again." The ambulance arrived, sirens blaring, and whisked him away to the hospital. I followed, my mind a jumble of emotions. Fear, relief, gratitude, and a burgeoning sense of love. It was a terrifying realization, a forbidden emotion that threatened to shatter the carefully constructed walls around my heart. The hours that followed were a blur of anxious waiting, punctuated by updates from the doctor. Broken leg, concussion, minor internal bleeding. He would be okay. Relief washed over me, followed by a wave of exhaustion. I stayed by his bedside, watching him sleep. His face, usually so vibrant and mischievous, was pale and drawn. But even in his weakened state, there was a strength in his features, a determination that resonated with me. As I cared for him, bathing his forehead, changing his bandages, reading to him, I felt a shift within me. The walls I had so carefully erected began to crumble, revealing a vulnerability I had long suppressed. I was falling for him, falling hard and fast, like a stone dropped into a bottomless well. "Miyu," he murmured one day, his eyes fluttering open. "You're here." "Of course I'm here, you idiot," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Where else would I be?" He smiled, a weak but genuine smile that lit up his face. "I thought I'd lost you again." "You'll never lose me, Shah," I whispered, taking his hand in mine. "Not again." He squeezed my hand, his eyes filled with a love so profound, so unwavering, that it took my breath away. In that moment I knew that I loved him, that I had always loved him, perhaps even in another life. And as I leaned down and kissed his lips, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging that I had never known before. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more dramatic, Haruto waltzed back into my life, looking like a lovesick puppy who'd lost his favorite chew toy. Apparently his grand reunion with Sakura hadn't exactly been a fairy tale ending. Who knew me? he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I need to talk to you." We were in the hospital cafeteria, a sterile, brightly lit space that felt strangely appropriate for this awkward encounter. Shota was asleep, thankfully giving me a brief respite from the emotional roller coaster that was my life. "What is there to talk about, Haruto?" I asked, my voice flat. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the lies, tired of the constant emotional tug-of-war. "I made a mistake," he said, his eyes pleading. "I was a fool. I let her manipulate me. And now you realize you want me back?" I scoffed, raising an eyebrow. "How convenient." "Please," he begged, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, my gaze hardening. "Don't insult me, Haruto," I said, my voice laced with steel. "I'm not your second choice. I'm not your consolation prize. I'm not your fallback option when things don't go your way." "But I love you, Mio," he insisted, his voice cracking. "I realize that now. I never stopped loving you." I stared at him, my heart aching with a mixture of sadness and pity. He really believed it, didn't he? He really thought that after everything, the betrayal, the lies, the blatant disregard for my feelings, he could just waltz back in and declare his love, and I would fall at his feet, grateful for the scraps of affection he was offering. "You don't love me, Haruto," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You love the idea of me. You love the comfortable, convenient life we had. You love the fact that I was always there for you, no matter what. But you don't love me, the person. You never did." He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "It's over, Haruto. Accept it. Move on. Find someone who appreciates you for who you are, not for what you can offer them." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I wasn't the same naive girl who had yearned for his love, who had sacrificed her own happiness for his. I had grown. I had evolved. I had learned to love myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest love of all. As I walked away from him, I felt a sense of closure, a sense of peace. The past was finally behind me. I had a new life now, a new love, a new future. And I was ready to embrace it with open arms and a heart full of hope. Life with Shota was unexpected, not bad, just different. He was a whirlwind of energy and chaos, a stark contrast to the quiet predictability of my life with Haruto. But beneath the playful teasing and the mischievous grin, there was a depth, a sincerity that I had never encountered before. He embraced my pregnancy with an enthusiasm that bordered on comical. He fussed over me, read parenting books, and even attempted to knit a tiny pair of booties, with disastrous results, I might add. He never once questioned the paternity of the child, his love for me extending unconditionally to the little life growing inside me. The baby, a healthy little boy. We named Kenji. He arrived a few months later, throwing our lives into further chaos. Shota, bless his clumsy heart, proved to be a surprisingly adept father. He changed diapers, sang lullabies, and built elaborate pillow forts with an enthusiasm that rivaled Kenji's own. As the years passed, our love deepened, evolving from a whirlwind romance into a comfortable, enduring partnership. We navigated the challenges of parenthood with laughter and patience, our bond strengthened by the shared joys and struggles of raising our son. And then one sunny afternoon, Shota proposed. It wasn't a grand theatrical gesture, just a simple question asked with a sincerity that brought tears to my eyes. "Marry me, Mimi," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Let's make this official." The wedding was a small, intimate affair held in the garden behind my flower shop. Friends, family, and the scent of blooming roses filled the air, creating a sense of warmth and celebration. As I stood at the altar, my hand in Shota's, I felt a sense of completeness I had never known before. And then I saw him, Haruto, standing at the back of the crowd, his face etched with a mixture of sadness and regret. Beside him stood a little boy, a miniature version of Haruto, his eyes wide with curiosity. As the ceremony ended, Haruto approached us, his gaze fixed on Kenji. He knelt down, offering Kenji a piece of candy. Kenji looked at him, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Mommy said not to take things from strangers," he said, his voice clear and firm. Haruto's face crumpled, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. I watched him, my heart filled with a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. I turned to Shota, my smile radiant. "Let's go, darling," I said, taking his hand. "We have a life to live." As we walked away hand in hand, I glanced back at Haruto one last time. He stood there, frozen in place, a solitary figure in a sea of happiness. And in that moment, I knew that I had finally broken free from the past. I had found my own happiness, my own love, my own family, and I would never let it go.